Listen, the city is quiet, the fires are banked, the wine is drunk. The horse stands in the square under a sky full of stars, and Troy, the city that held for 10 years, that the Hittites called Wilusa, that built walls so thick the gods themselves were said to have laid the foundations, is sleeping. Aeneas has his armor on a hook for the first time in months, his father dozing in the next room, his son curled by the hearth. Paris lies beside Helen, dreaming that the ships never came. Andromache holds Astyanax against her chest, asleep mid-prayer. Priam and Hecuba rest in the royal quarters, his hand on her arm, finally at peace. And Cassandra sits awake in the doorway of the Megaron, watching the horse, waiting for the sound she knows is coming. This is day 7. The finale. Tonight, hope opens a trapdoor, and a city dies. Midnight, the square is empty. The guard beside the horse, the only man on duty in a city that forgot to be afraid, sleeps with his chin on his chest. Sinon moves along the base of the walls to the signal point, strikes the flint, holds the torch high. Behind the island of Tenedos, 1,000 ships see the flame. No trumpets, no war cries, just oars and hulls through black water. And in the square, the horse opens. The trapdoor drops. Neoptolemus hits the stones first, then Odysseus, cold-eyed and silent, then the rest, men chosen for speed, for the ability to kill a sentry before he draws breath to shout. They spread, 2 to the southern gate, 2 to the northern. Odysseus leads 4 toward the great gate, the one the Trojans dragged the horse through with their own hands yesterday. The sleeping guard dies, sitting up, a hand over his mouth. The bar is heavy, 3 men to lift it. The gate swings open, groaning, the sound of a promise ending. Beyond it, on the moonlit road, the Greek army is already running. It starts at the southern gate. Oil pots shatter against the houses of the lower town. Torches follow. The fire catches in timber and thatch and stored grain, and the Dardanelles wind, always blowing at Troy, pushes it uphill. Within minutes, the lower city is burning, and the fire has a voice, a roar, a living sound, a city being eaten. The screaming starts. Not one scream, 1,000. Men reach for swords they haven't touched in days and die reaching, waking drunk and confused into a nightmare too fast to survive. Aeneas wakes. The general smells wrong smoke, structural, total, and is on his feet before he's fully conscious, strapping bronze in the dark by habit alone. Aeneas, his father's voice from the next room. "Father, stay here. I'm coming back." He runs toward the fighting, not away from it, because command is a stronger habit than fear. He finds a barricade, 12 men holding a street. "Form up, shields front." They hold 10 minutes, long enough for Aeneas to see the whole picture the way a sailor reads the sea. The gates are open, the lower city is gone. There is no rally left, only the eastern postern gate and whoever reaches it. "Fall back! Eastern gate, go!" Some listen. Some charge forward instead, because they're Trojans and their city is burning and dying on their feet feels better than running. He watches them go. He watches them die. Then he turns uphill, toward his father, toward his son, Paris. Helen shakes him awake. "The horse," she says. 2 words, enough. The guilt returns all at once, a fist to the chest. His fault. The war, the siege, the fire, all of it. He grabs the bow, not the sword. Paris has always been an archer, and he'll die one. "Go to the walls," Helen says, steady, as if she's had 10 years to prepare for exactly this. He runs to the western wall, Hector's wall, the one every Trojan avoids. He stands in his dead brother's place and shoots, fast and accurate, and Greeks fall below him, one after another. The archer, defending the city he destroyed. An arrow finds him from the side. He looks down at it, almost smiles. The archer killed by an arrow, the kind of irony the poets will love. He sits against Hector's stone and watches the city burn below. Andromache. The screaming wakes Astyanax first. Andromache is on her feet instantly, hand over his mouth, because she's been ready for this night for 10 years. The escape bag by the door, the dark shawl, the knife under the mattress. She runs the servants' corridor she's mapped in her mind for months, left at the storeroom, right at the granary, down toward the eastern postern. 2 Greek soldiers block the way. They see the boy. Astyanax is on a list. The sons of enemy kings cannot be allowed to grow up. "Give us the boy," one says in Greek. She holds him and says nothing because there are no words in any language for this. They pry him from her arms, finger by finger, and the sound she makes when they separate is not a human sound. It's the sound of the thing mothers are built to prevent happening anyway. Astyanax, son of Hector, is thrown from the walls of Troy. He is perhaps 3. He looks like his father. It is what happens to the children of every conquered city, in every age, and no amount of grief has ever stopped it. Priam, the old king, reaches the altar of Zeus, the last sacred place, where even enemies in theory should not spill blood. Neoptolemus finds him there, 20 years old, his father's rage without his father's restraint. Priam looks up at the young man with Achilles' jaw and Achilles' cold eyes. "Your father," he says, "would not have done this." It's a lie. A king's last, necessary lie, and Neoptolemus kills him anyway. At the altar, blood on the stones of a god. A sacrilege that will follow the Greeks home. Agamemnon will die in his bath. Ajax will drown. Odysseus will wander 10 years. The price of Troy is paid on every road home. Helen. She stands in the burning palace and waits. Paris is dead on the walls. She's heard the shout. There's nowhere left to run. Menelaus finds her in the corridor, covered in blood that isn't his, sword drawn. The army swore she would die when Troy fell. He looks at her. The sword goes up. It stays up. He can't do it. Not because she's beautiful, because she's Helen, the woman he knew how to pour wine for, who remembered the name of his horse. The sword comes down at his side instead. He pulls her toward the ships, and whether she's rescued or recaptured depends entirely on which version of the story you believe. Cassandra. She runs to the temple of Athena. Sacred ground. The one place a person should be untouchable. Ajax of Locris finds her at the altar, drunk on blood and survival, and drags her from it. She doesn't scream. She screamed enough for one lifetime. And tonight, when it might finally matter, she has nothing left. She will be given to Agamemnon. She will see his murder before it happens, and tell him, and he will not believe her, and she will die beside him anyway. The prophet, who was right about everything, believed about nothing. Aeneas's escape. Aeneas fights his way back through smoke and Greek soldiers, taking a wound on the stairs, and finds his father sitting calmly on the bed. "Leave me. I'm too old." "No." He kneels. He takes his father onto his back, thin arms around his neck, the arms that once held him, now holding on. His son Ascanius waits by the door, 5 years old, crying silently, a wooden sword in his hand. "Take my hand. Don't let go." Father on his back, son at his side. They find the eastern postern gate, small, forgotten, unguarded, and push through into the dark hills behind the city. He doesn't know that poets will trace a line from this exact moment to the founding of Rome. He only knows the weight on his back, the hand in his hand, the fire behind him, the dark ahead. Dawn. The sun rises on Troy for the last time. The walls still stand. They were never breached. 10 years of siege and they held. But the gates hang open, and everything behind them is ash. The Megaron is a smoking ruin. Hector's armor, polished every day for months, has melted in the fire. The horse stands half burned in the square, garlands gone to ash, trapdoor hanging open. It looks like what it always was, a wooden box that held 30 men and ended a civilization. The Greeks divide what's left, Andromache to Neoptolemus, Cassandra to Agamemnon, Helen back to Menelaus. The men are killed, the boys are killed, the city is stripped to its bones and abandoned. Within a generation, grass grows in the streets. Within 1,000 years, a man named Schliemann will dig into a mound in Turkey and find slingstones and arrowheads and fire. The destruction layer at Hisarlik is real. Fire, unburied bodies, hundreds of slingstones, arrowheads embedded in the fortification walls. Recent excavation seasons confirm violent destruction in the late 13th or early 12th century BC, a military sacking, not an earthquake or slow decline. The Hittite connection is real too. Tablets from Hattusa mention a city called Wilusa, a king whose name echoes Alexandros, Paris's other name in Homer, and a western sea power, the Ahiawa, causing trouble on the coast. By the time Troy fell, the Hittite Empire was already collapsing. No help was coming from the east, just like the story says. The horse itself has no archaeological trace, no mention in any Bronze Age text. It survives only in the poems. Homer, Virgil, the lost epics. Maybe it's a siege engine. Maybe it's Poseidon, god of horses and earthquakes both. Maybe it's simply the truest kind of story. Proof that trust kills more surely than swords. What we know for certain, a fortified city stood at Hisarlik. It was besieged. It burned. The walls were never breached. The destruction came from inside. Troy didn't fall to an army. Troy fell to a story, a lie told well, by a man who knew how to cry on cue, to a city that needed to believe the war was over. Hope was the weapon. The walls were never the weakness. Trust was. The smoke rises. The walls stand empty against the morning sky. And on the road east, in the hills, a man walks with his father on his back and his son by the hand, into a future neither of them can see. This has been a week in ancient Troy, the week the horse arrived. Thank you for watching, and be careful what you drag through your gates.